Welcome to EPJ Pathshala. I am Pirzada Rauf and I teach at Jindal Global University. And in today's module, we'll be talking about geopolitical issues related to climate change and climate variability. In this module, we'll be dealing with understanding climate variability and change, geopolitical climatic perspective of climatic change or climate change, geopolitical solution to climate change. So we have three topics to discuss about, and the learning outcomes would be discussing the difference between climate change and variability, understanding the geopolitics of climate change, and a look forward for the geopolitical solution to climate change. And here we have some keywords, which is climate change, climate variability, La Nina, greenhouse effect, understanding climate variability and change. To differentiate between climate and weather, one needs to look into the time frame for operation. The lengthier arrow in different figures which refer to the time frame in the terms of hour, days, months, years, decades and centuries. It also illustrates here that the climate refers to decades and centuries, while weather is in reference to an hour, days or months or years. Examples of climate and weather are tropical cyclone that refer to climate and weather is the rain at a particular time. Climate variability is a result of El Nino or the southern oscillations, but climate change is the result of geographical location based on certain geographical parameters such as atmospheric pressure and human activities. The climate variability is used by three main large-scale features: the Southern Pacific Convergence Zone, SPCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, and Western Tropical Monsoon, WPM. The South Pacific Convergence Zone is a zone that accounts for the heavy rainfall that extends from Solomon Islands to the east of the Cook Islands. In the winter session of the Southern Hemisphere, it becomes more intensified and is strongest. ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, passes through the Pacific, moving from just north of the equator. It intensifies in the wet season of the northern hemisphere. The large difference of the temperature between the land mass and the ocean body creates the West Pacific monsoons. It shifts northwards to the Indian subcontinent during the summer of northern hemisphere and to the south during the summer of southern hemisphere. The coming up of monsoons bring a shift from hot, dry to cold, wet climate or weather. The monsoonal features, which is affected by the southern oscillation, have a considerable effect on the various climatic determinants and its factors. This brings a change in the cyclonic condition and the precipitation pattern. The summer wet season of the southern hemisphere brings heavy monsoonal rain to the region of the South Pacific Convergence Zone. Also, high rainfall can be seen in the Intertropical Convergence Zone. Climate variability is the term used to describe the short-term changes in climate conditions that take place over months, seasons, and years. The different phases of ENSO can cause droughts and floods. Every El Nino and La Nina events are different, and so they have different climatic impacts. El Nino and La Nina events drive changes in circulation, winds, rainfall, and ocean surface temperatures. The trade wind, and in different maps as shown as arrows, blow to the west and cause a buildup of warm surface water and higher sea levels in the West Pacific. The warm water heats the air above it, making the moist air rise and forming clouds. This is called convection. This warmer air then moves east to where the air is cooler. The cool air sinks towards the surface and moves west, creating a convective circulation. Under La Nina conditions, ocean temperatures across the central and the eastern tropical Pacific Oceans are cooler than the normal, that is blue and green areas in the map, and the easterly trade winds are stronger and normal across Pacific Ocean. La Nina usually brings wetter than normal conditions to countries like Australia, Tonga, because rainfall moves farther from the southwest than under normal conditions. El Nino brings extensive warming of the central and eastern Pacific and weaker than the normal easterly trade winds, leading to a major shift in weather patterns across the Pacific. The typical El Nino conditions in the northern hemisphere as a result of winter in the western Pacific experiencing very dry conditions and the central Pacific around the equator experiencing wetter conditions. The 1997 El Nino brought drought to countries like Papua New Guinea. The causes of climate change. There are many causes of climate change. The Earth has seen changes in its climatic conditions over the years due to many natural as well as anthropological reasons. These include Earth's orbital change that occur naturally over thousands of years. The change in the sun's composition can affect the incoming solar radiation. Eruption of ashes during volcanic activities can lead to development of ashes on the outer layer of atmosphere, which can reflect back the incoming radiation and thereby reducing the temperature of the Earth. Changes in the atmospheric circulation caused by natural means. The role of greenhouse gases, which has had a great impact, can be talked about like this. The greenhouse effect makes the Earth inhabitable place. Without the greenhouse effect, the average temperature at the Earth's surface would be below freezing point of water, as some of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere absorb the outgoing solar radiation and reflect it back to the Earth's surface as the temperatures, much as we know them now, get raised. The greenhouse gases in the atmosphere resembles the walls of greenhouse, keeping the heat in. These greenhouse gases include water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous dioxide, nitrous oxide, and some industrial gases such as CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, water vapor, carbon dioxide are the important ones. Adding more of a greenhouse gas such as carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, it intensifies the greenhouse effect, thus resulting in warming Earth's climate. The amount of temperature which rises through greenhouse gases depends on both the internal and external mechanism. The geopolitical economic perspective of climate change is very important to discuss, as mostly it never gets discussed in classes or in the books. Since the earliest time of the origin of humans have been interacting with the nature through the tools of productions, which have seen changes in the relationship based on dialectics, it is still intact between humans and nature, though the development of human gained their status as an independent being in the position to counter the environmentally vulnerable conditions. It was only after the rise of capitalism and the growth of industries which created human needs and the commodification of the use values, which culminated into indiscriminate cutting of trees and destabilizing the carbon content in atmosphere. As a result, the concentration of carbon dioxide increased dramatically. The ability of Earth to act as natural sink for carbon dioxide, which was lost due to capitalist thrust towards commodification. In order to get through the structures that create a rift in carbon metabolism, one has to look for the agents that emit carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It is now well settled that human by interference with the natural flow of energy through changes in atmospheric compositions. Global changes in atmospheric composition occur from anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide that results from the burning of fossil fuel, and methane and nitrous oxide from multiple human activities. We have driven the Earth system from a tightly bounded domain of glacial interglacial dynamics, the one which has been the identity of Earth for more than 4 lakh years. We also found that the problem of climate change lays in the growth of industrial setup, and also some scientists have noted that more of the industrial development, more would be the rise in the temperature of the Earth. And here we are talking about the average temperature. But it is the only now that we have data which states that the quantity of carbon dioxide has increased 31% since pre-industrial times, and that half of this increase has been since 1965. The geopolitics of climate change includes the rise of terrorism and the civil unrest in the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. It is attributed to the toxic brew of historical conflicts, cultural and religious tensions, and a myriad of complex features which are important drivers of deadly conflict within the and across many borders. And then in 2011, the simultaneous uprising for the political change throughout the Middle East, referred to as Arab Spring, was thought to be provoked, at least in part, by the large-scale population movements due to drought and other climate-related conditions. Nations need arable land, so they need clean water to sustain peaceful growth, long-term stability, and domestic security. The forced migration and the increasing decline in the productivity due to the climate change and the failure of the state apparatus to provide better means to address such grievances have led to growth of distrust among people for the government across the globe. People are increasingly getting radicalized in the name of religion, caste, race, color, sect, region. The helplessness of the government to protect the people's right over their resources in confrontation with the imperial capital have fueled the growth of social movements across the world led by leftist groups. Two reports issued by the Center for the Naval Analysis, released in 2007 and 2014, focused on the national security implications of climate change. The CNA's Military Advisory Board, consisting of numerous military leaders with decades of experience as risk managers and geopolitical security experts, warned that climate change can act as a threat multiplier for instability in some of the most volatile regions of the world, and it presents significant national security challenges for the United States. The second report expressed a particular concern about the continued lack of sufficient actions by the United States and the international community to adapt to projected climate change despite the growing body of scientific evidence regarding its likely causes and consequences. There is no exaggeration to say that the rising level of terrorism has its link to the question of climate change. Syria's recent history of extreme civil unrest is a good example in hand of the dynamics involved. The first sign of civil unrest in Syria manifested in the period when the whole country was affected by drought. From 2005 to 2010, Syria experienced its most severe drought on instrumental record. Scientific models have concluded that the anthropological factors have been responsible for the climate change at such a level which has caused severe drought or floods in different regions of the world. And droughts of this scale inevitably lead to forced migration and national anxieties about economic and social stability. These anxieties have the capability to cause civil unrest within the state, and it also provides a chance to the enemy state to attack the resources rich land of the nation. Thus, looking even from a neoliberal frame, the climate change issues have to be resolved as soon as possible. The crisis in the Middle East and the political turmoil in the region would serve as a warning for the effect which climate change might have on the political economy of the region. The average increase in the global temperature on Earth has roughly been 1.35 degree Fahrenheit from 1880 to 2012, but it projected the increase of 2.7 Fahrenheit by 2100, thus expressing extreme migration of the people and emission of greenhouse gases. The rising temperatures melts the snow, which leads to floods, destroys the habitat of various coastal species, further failing to consider the link between climate change and growth of radicalism and extremism that would lead to undermining the impact of climate change on the global political space. The economics of climate change talks about in terms of David Harvey when in his book he writes that capitalism and its 17 contradictions points out that there is a clear contradiction between the processes of capital accumulation and the environmental limit to such accumulation. The capitalist economy tries to locate the problem of climate change within the structure that has led to it. The present mode of production and the environment is really compatible with each other. Spending on the process to reduce the climate change and its impact would prove to be a futile exercise if the fundamental question concerning such issues are not addressed. Scientists have estimated that the worst impact of climate change can be reduced if the carbon level in the atmosphere remains between 450 parts per million to 500 parts per million. The present level of 430 parts per million of CO2 is on the rise at the rate of 2 ppm per year. Stabilization in the rate would require reduction of emissions, greenhouse gases by 80% in 2020. Ultimately, stabilization at whatever level requires the annual emissions to be brought down to more than 80% below current levels. Estimates say that the cost of achieving the stabilization would be about 1% of the annual global GDP. Costs would decrease further if the states in an efficient way attempts to reduce air pollution level by halting industrial expansion at the cost of air and water. Costs would accelerate if there is less spending on the ways of control and the carbon emission, but the contradictions of such spending within the broader matrix of imperialist political economy would mean a post-dated check for carbon reduction. The world has been witnessing a shifting of its burden to the third world countries to combat or to deal with climate change. Thus, they have to pay for what they have never consumed. Rich countries are developing corporations and are setting markets for them in the poor countries or third world countries through the way of fear creation among the third world about climate change and its impact on them. This fear has created an absolute space for the scale of climate change remedies in the third world countries. This also acts as a blanket cover for the imperial capital exploitative means of resource extraction. Geopolitical solution to climate change. In one of the seminal works by David Willio, he talks about 6 major solutions to global warming that are advancing in its unprecedented pace. First is clean power plants. There has been an increasing shift towards the use of solar energy for generation of energy, not just in underdeveloped or developing countries, but also to a certain extent in the developed countries. The colleges in India are not being powered by solar cells. Besides, the growing installation of the solar panel on the people's rooftop. Such solar panel in America generates 2 gigawatts of electricity, while the natural gas is replacing the old form of cooking coal. Shale revolution have proved to be a boon to combat climate change. It has reduced the emissions to a considerable extent. At the same time, it has led to growth in economy of the nation. Chinese sees nuclear power as best available alternative to substitute the exhaustible energy sources. Besides, they have also an eye on the hydro or the wind power. Through local actions by various interest groups proves to be highly valuable in the effort to stop climate change than that of institutionalized central efforts. Like that in the US northeastern state, at the regional level, people participated in the campaign to stop climate change by looking for alternative sources of energy. They also planned practices which would help in efficient utilization of the energy resources. The program was highly successful, and the US government planned to reduce the carbon cap by 45% in the coming years. The central governments would provide more power for resource control to the semi-state of non-state actors. This would provide means for a better efficient way to combat climate change. Control of the methane leakages. Methane, the gas which is more potent to act as a greenhouse gas to facilitate depletion of ozone layer than carbon dioxide. Thus, any sort of leakage in the supply of gases would mean disastrous to climate. The need is therefore for regular maintenance of pipelines through various regulations. Methane currently accounts for 9% of the greenhouse gas emission, which will rise on account of increasing gas pipeline connectivity across the globe. An action to reduce methane emission would prove to be more beneficial to stop climate change than to attempt to restrict the emission of CO2. Tougher emissions and efficient standards. Car manufacturing techniques are being renewed, which have been more environment friendly, and it has reduced pollution level to considerable degree. Such manufacturing units are based especially in US and China. When the world heads towards 2 billion vehicles that focuses on less emission of carbon in atmosphere, it will have to be established through hybrid or efficient combustible engines. Electric cars are the way towards reduction of gases in the atmosphere. These cars run not from the burning of fossil fuels, but rather work on electricity which can be provided by wind or solar power. Besides this, the regulations on the use of non-renewable energy sources have to be stricter so that the carbon emission is reduced to the extent sufficient to make Earth a place fit for survival. The next is green farming. US Department of Agriculture helps the farmers to combat the global warming phenomenon by providing environment-friendly fertilizers and similar chemicals. The regional climatic hubs have been formed that provide tactical support to combat the climate change processes. Wetland preservations have also been done to stop erosion and flood. The forest reserves of different states are now being managed with a goal to preserve carbon dioxide content. Farmers have been adopting different methods to adopt and resist the change in climate change. They have started using the biofertilizers and green manure to increase the productivity. Though different techniques they have been using to reduce greenhouse gases emission to a certain extent. Farmers across the globe are using energy crops for biofuels. New kinds of geopolitical consciousness, which is most important. The most polluting countries, namely US, China, they signed an agreement to solve the problem of climate change. The agreement provides that China will put a tap on use of exhaustible resources and would use wind or solar power to facilitate its economy. The plan by China was to get 20% of its energy from the wind energy or from the solar energy. But the US agreed to reduce the pollution generation from 1 to 2%. Besides the European Union, we have also pledged to reduce carbon emission to considerable degree. Developing countries are looking forward to renewable resources of energy in order to secure their economical interest. This has also been due to the imperial focus on extraction of exhaustible resources of energy, while they spend a large amount of money on encouraging the market expansion in the non-exhaustible energy resources. As a result, Kenya has become one of the biggest hotspots for the geothermal energy, and India is heading towards a solar-powered country, while the imperial regime of US is busy extracting the exhaustible resources from these third world nations. A survey conducted by Bloomberg Foundation has found that developing countries have been producing 55% more renewable energy than that of the developed nations. If you are burning diesel to light your home, that isn't great, as said by Bloomberg's Zindler. You have now to displace that with PV, which has been due to the creation of market space within the structure of sustainable environment. And in the summary, what we learned was difference between climate change and the variability, which is the result of difference in time reference, and the nations which need arable land and clean water to sustain peaceful growth, long-term stability and domestic security. The shale revolution, which has helped US to reduce carbon emissions to a considerable extent. Thank you.